So, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you're calling from, calling in from, and for everybody who's going to be watching afterwards. I'm so excited to be doing this. Gosh, this might be like the 10th time I've given this presentation, and every time it's a little different. I add to it. So pleased that you are here. If you don't mind, and this is an invitation only, I would like to do a quick couple of surveys. And the surveys are basically going to be whether you primarily consider yourself a consumer or a professional, and then the second one will be your familiarity with psychedelics. So, and again, an invitation. This is totally anonymous, though. We'll just report the percentages. So, if you could go ahead and tell me, are you primarily a consumer, a professional, or just neither? And you're curious.
Where's your both option, Chris?
Well,
Got to lean one way or the other.
Yes, that is a very good question. I actually just before the presentation deleted it because that's why I go primarily, or let's say, what do you consider yourself, your role, your prime role?
Okay.
But that's funny. I guess I'll put it back in.
You're getting a few boths in the chat.
Yeah. All right. I'll put it back in for next time. All right, cool. Thank you so much. So I will show you all the results of this. So 70% of you are primarily a professional. So thank you so much. And then 21% of you primarily a consumer. Cool. Thank you. All right. So then the second one is, what is your familiarity? All right. It's here somewhere.
Oh, Numa, I'm not seeing anything.
No, I was trying to find it. All right, there you go. Again, an invitation to let me know, let us know. Okay, it's chunking away. All right, excellent. Thank you. I will share this. So this is cool. 33% some, 5% none. So between the facilitator, prescriber, and which I see I spelled wrong, and vary, we've got more than 50%. All right, so cool. So hopefully we'll all get to learn something new today. All right, so enough with that. And now we'll get on with the presentation. What I'm going to ask you is a favor. If you could refrain from putting any comments in the chat for now. What I'm going to do this time is hop out about halfway through and take questions, because I got to tell you, there's many more slides here than we're going to be able to get to today. But since you're all going to get a copy of these slides, I wanted to be able to have them in the slide set and at least refer to them so you can go back and look later. And wherever appropriate, there is the link as well to either, well, to the source in general or to the resource. So, having said that, yes, so just a little bit about me. The end-of-life psychedelic care is something I launched in May of 2023, and it's really resonated with a lot of folks, you know, kind of indicative of what we're seeing here. And we have three pillars, basically. We educate, we advocate, and we connect, and we'll refer to some of those things later on. I graduated from a 12-month Psychedelics Today program, which I highly recommend. It's a very comprehensive program. I also completed this amazing ACER integration program with Dr. Rosalind Watts, one of the early on researchers as a psychotherapist in the trials in psychedelic trials in general, but ACER stands for Accept, Connect, Embody, and Restore. And it's built around a Celtic cycle of the year, and it's pretty cool. Anyway, I also owned a 250 client home healthcare agency, which I think really began my journey in terms of taking care of and taking care about, or beginning to care about older adults. And of course, now I am one. So, you know, it's pretty cool. And I hold 3 certifications through Deepak Chopra programs. Today, what we'll do is I'll go through an intro to psychedelics and cover real briefly sort of its history. Most of you will know this, and then dive into some of the research and the applications for the psychedelics. And then we'll really shift talking about psychedelics at the end of life and cover spirituality, share some real life stories, and sharing what it really means to serve at the end of life, because to me, it's clearly different than for any of you that facilitate folks that aren't worried about the fear of dying. And arguably, I mean, there's a lot of commonalities, but there are a lot of differences to take into account. So if we just look at some of the history, you know, the thing we know, and this is psilocybin mushrooms. I mean, these things have been around for thousands and thousands of years, used safely within a safe container, you know, bound sort of by the cultural mores of whether it's South America. See, this is in Algeria, so all over the world. And then even the Eleusinian mysteries. And for anybody who's interested, this book, The Immortality Key by Brian Marescu, is a really amazing researched book about the use of what they considered to be kukian, a psychedelic brew, back some 4,000 years ago, and gave the key to immortality. So then, you know, fast forward to now where, oops, where that went. Oh, well, that was supposed to show Maria Sabina giving Gordon Wasson psilocybin in the 1950s. And then he wrote, and he was there with his wife, he wrote and was featured in this Life magazine. That's Bert Lahr. He's not the one who did psilocybin. It just happens to be on the cover. But it really started to bring this to the West, and of course created all sorts of controversy. I mean, Maria Sabina was basically ousted from her town. Her son's home was burned. So it created a lot of problems for people. But between Gordon and his wife, Valerie, when the news hit the news waves in America, they just started to flood down to Mexico and places South and South America. We're going to focus today on 3 psychedelics. There certainly are others, and if anybody has any questions or comments about that, we can take them later on. But these are the ones that are probably the safest, although 5-MeO is also used for folks, and has been really instrumental for folks very close to the end of life, because you can use it in a very, very, very low dose, and the arc of its journey is very short, as most of you would know. And in fact, I'm going to do a workshop on 5-MeO at the end of March, if anybody's interested. So basically, if we look at, you know, there are some key similarities. The psychedelics create an altered state of consciousness. They all have the capability of reducing anxiety and depression and other mental distress. They all increase neuroplasticity. So this is the beauty of psychedelics, and why we all say you really need to work on the insights, whatever came up during your journey, to really help forge new thought patterns. Because what we know is neuroplasticity can cut both ways. You can build really terrible habits and brain grooves, or you can build some really good ones. And so it's really important to work on building the new thought patterns and behaviors. We know that they all probe deep into the psyche, so they have the propensity of bringing up things that maybe many of us didn't want to bring up. And so you have to be very aware that trauma can surface and will have to be dealt with at some point or other. And so I guess this would be it. All right, I just wanted to point this out because one of the things that comes up is, well, this is one of the reasons why scientists believe that psychedelics have this neuroplasticity effect, and that is tying the acute subjective effects to actually opening up what we call the social reward critical period. So that period of time when we were very, very, very young and we had this ability to learn so much. I mean, it was so amazing when we were toddlers. And that ability to open up that social reward circuitry and really build neuroplasticity is tied or related to the length of the journey. So ketamine on the far left has the shortest journey. Hence, we call it short lasting. It's also fast acting, but very short lasting. And then you go out all the way towards ibogaine, where it's the longest journey, can be, I don't know, 24, 36 hours sometimes for a journey, literally. And so that sort of neuroplasticity lasts for a whole lot longer. So, and that's why we also say for ketamine to work with a coach, a therapist, to work on yourself is really best within 48 to 72 hours of a medicine session. So let's switch into psilocybin now specifically. You know, it's known as a classic psychedelic and it works on the serotonergic system primarily. All of these psychedelics work on multiple systems, but basically the serotonergic system, one of the things it does is it quiets the default mode network. And that is a network in the brain comprised of mainly three regions. One of the primary one being all right, now I got prefrontal cortex. And what it does when it quiets that down, we have an ability to calm ourselves. For any of us subject to anxiety or depression, we have an overactive default mode network. So the theory is if we can quiet it down, and I'm an example of this, then you can actually get on top of your depression and your anxiety and begin to resource yourself. Psilocybin is considered one of the gentlest on the body, and it does have a higher potential for mystical experience and unity consciousness. Now, they kind of all do to varying degrees. MDMA certainly far less. Ketamine, some people will report this, but clearly psilocybin has this higher potential. So when we think about its use at the end of life, this is why it's really, really, really key, because it can bring that mystical experience and it can bring that sense of consciousness. And if that's what you're looking for, often enough, that's what you find. The big thing about psilocybin that's really cool, tough, but really cool, is that it can bring issues front and center. Many people in the cancer trials have reported that they talked with their cancer. I'm gonna show you an example of a gentleman that did talk with their cancer, come to resolution with their cancer, have dinner with their cancer. If it's embodied in their body and say a sort of black, however they envision the cancer in their body, they're able to dissipate it. So it's really phenomenal in that way. We know it's a 4 to 6 hour journey duration and no known lethal dose, and it's non-addictive. This is our sort of obligatory slide we always show to show the effects of psilocybin on the brain, and also another reason why it's thought that you become more creative, you can build new thought patterns, new behavior patterns. So on the left, our communication pathways tend to stay within a region or within a specific network. So for example, the visual cortex, you know, maybe that's the purple bubbles communicating to each other. But on psilocybin, those pathways go all over the place. And again, this is where the potential for creativity, looking at things in a new way, is thought to happen. A quick couple of things about the psilocybin research. So Johns Hopkins, NYU, and also UCLA are what I consider the granddaddies of the modern research. because there were several LSD studies done back in the 50s and 60s before research was shut down. But you can see here Johns Hopkins on the far left and then NYU in the middle. So those lighter blue bars represent anxiety. And you see that fully 80% of the participants in Johns Hopkins experience a significant reduction in anxiety. In the NYU study, not as much. I can tell you that Johns Hopkins was a 2 psilocybin session study. NYU was just a single dose. But nonetheless, for depression, you can see they're right up there together. And these were after the primary endpoints. Now, what I think is so totally cool and sort of in contrast with ketamine, for example, is when we look on the far right, that's Sunstone Therapies, and they're a facility in Rockville, Maryland that has done and is doing a lot of work with Johns Hopkins. And so they only looked at depression. And so at their primary endpoint, similar results, about 80%. And then looking at 18 months later, this is where it gets really exciting. 18 months later, you see that the reduction in depression, significant reduction, is still being reported as 64%, and fully 57% of the folks are reporting being in remission. So, it can be long lasting. It's not for everybody. In fact, the one gentleman whose short video you'll see later, if possible, he liked to do psilocybin journeys like once, maybe every 3 months. And this was legally, this was in Canada, and he had been approved for psilocybin therapy. This is, so this, for anybody who wants to look it up, this was, they didn't really have that many people that reported, but basically this is a report on some of the participants who did experience the Canadian. So in Canada, there is, through Health Canada, a special access program where people, if their physicians help them put in an application, can get approved for psilocybin therapy if you have a life-threatening or serious illness. So basically, they're reporting significant improvements in anxiety. But interestingly enough, in this small group, attitudes toward death and medical aid in dying and a desire for hastened death remained unchanged. I mean, it'd be interesting, to try and take that on a much wider scale. And one of the issues with the current special access program is it's not like a research study. They don't collect data rigorously, which is why you see a lot of researchers now working to build research programs. I wanted to mention a couple of other things because this is a really exciting field of study. So again, a very, very small study, N equal 12. And it was folks with mild to moderate Parkinson's severity given 2 psilocybin doses. So people's cognitive performance improved significantly, and also exciting, motor experiences improved significantly, as well as depression. Anxiety, you see there, interestingly enough, reductions at the primary endpoint, but didn't register as significant until a 3-month follow-up. This would have been with therapy, and but I forget how long that therapy lasted, but it could be kind of long. I'm just pure speculation. It could be like what I was saying earlier, you do the work. The psychedelic itself may not change your attitude, but as you begin to do the work and you get on top of that anxiety and be able to manage it, is what really works for you. This is also something to be aware of. So there is a company, a startup called Solera in Tampa. And as you see here, they are working with a non-hallucinogenic compound for dementia. So again, stay tuned. Pretty exciting that this stuff is starting to move forward. I just wanted to mention here that the typical research criteria and eligibility for psilocybin, and this is in the research trials. So basically what they looked at was life-threatening and progressive, but not necessarily terminal. However, they did allow people to participate with any stage of cancer, but in this case, with basically, as you see here, CNS or brain tumors. However, that is also changing, and people are beginning to look at participants or being able to include that in the studies. So also interesting is that whether you were in the middle of chemotherapy, radiation, or other treatment, you also were permitted to participate, not necessarily right in the middle of chemotherapy, but around it. And then also long-acting opioid medications were permitted for use. They never, ever stopped anyone from taking their medications for pain. And then for anybody who's interested in participating in a study, or if you have a client who might be interested in a study, here's a whole list, and you just need to go to clinicaltrials.gov and put in these search terms, and they will pop up. But just to point out a few really, really cool ones, well, they're all cool, but again, that top one, they're going to be looking at Parkinson's again. I love the second one because they're going to be using ketamine as an active control. So as most of you would know, a lot of the criticism about psychedelic research revolves around breaking blind. So 0.5 milligrams per kilogram is a pretty significant dose of ketamine. People are going to know they're on a journey. Some may know if they're really psychedelic savvy that there's a difference, but a lot of people won't. So this is totally cool. These studies are pretty much in the planning or recruiting stages. And then you see University of Washington. So but I'll jump down. You see Johns Hopkins, they are in the middle. So they are looking at patients with mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's. So really pushing the envelope there. And then jump down towards the end with, you see Diamond Therapeutics. There's actually at least 3 studies that I know of that are looking at microdosing. So this is also really interesting and cutting edge. They're also just to watch out for Mind Bio has been doing a study with LSD, microdosing LSD in Australia. So I think they're wrapping up the dosing session. So hopefully we'll see some top line results pretty soon. And then down there at the bottom, Dana-Farber looking at the management of opioid resistant pain. I mean, we know that psychedelics can help with severe pain. So it's nice to see that really researchers are starting to study this. MDMA, totally different. So we call it a heart opener, and it enables self-compassion and other compassion. So really great for anyone who has death anxiety, who has to deal with their mortality and looking at themselves and forgiving themselves for anything or forgiving others. So it can be used to deepen or repair relationships. In this case, though, mystical experiences are rare because MDMA actually increases the activity in the prefrontal cortex while decreasing the activity in the amygdala. So that center responsible for fear, which is why MDMA has been so great in its use for PTSD, because it allows people suffering from trauma to relive their experiences and their perspectives on that experience from a more sort of observational standpoint and with a self-compassion standpoint, and come to resolution. There was only one study done for MDMA with life-threatening illness, and this was out of UCSF with MAPS. It was a very small study with 19 participants. So they basically went back and interviewed a subset of those participants. And you see basically what happened was they were able to better cope. They had better resilience in the face of their cancer. So, still pretty compelling, but unfortunately just a really small study. And what was really exciting was that Sunstone Therapies had started a study with cancer patients in a dyad. So one of the dyad had to have a cancer diagnosis, but the other individual could be the spouse, could be an adult child, could be a significant other. And as far as I can tell, it was stopped. And this happened after the FDA rejected the MDMA application because they were doing it under what was called an expanded access program. So this is really unfortunate, but many of you would probably know that MDMA was actually used in couples therapy prior to 1985 when it was put into Schedule 1. So it is known to really help, as I said, deepen or repair relationships. So, fingers crossed this will come back. Ketamine, yet another sort of beast or molecule. So this one, the only one that's been approved through the FDA, and this was approved more than 50 years ago. And it was used on the Vietnam War battlefield. It is known as a dissociative anesthetic, but clearly what it was used is as you see there, an analgesic and as an anesthetic. And what the military physicians began to realize that the soldiers who'd been given ketamine basically reported less PTSD symptoms, less depression, less anxiety. So it finally began to be used off-label, not just for those situations, but also for chronic pain. And this is where ketamine also, and I'll share a story about chronic pain and mental health and ketamine later on. But it's just phenomenal when you think about chronic pain going hand in hand with the severity of mental health toward the end of life. You reduce the chronic pain, you can reduce mental distress. You reduce mental distress, you can reduce the chronic pain. They very much go hand in glove. We know that one form of ketamine was approved for FDA specifically for treatment-resistant depression and major depressive disorder with suicidal ideation. And so it is the only one that can be approved for insurance should your insurance agency reimburse for that. Again, it's very, very, very different. It creates a surge in glutamate, and glutamate is an excitatory transmitter, and it basically affects a lot of our other systems, but for our purposes here, on mood and on learning and memory. So the way it acts, and we're not going into the mechanism of action here, again, it's fast acting but short lasting. And it's so great for people with suicidal ideation, because there have been studies looking at this where suicidal ideation has been reduced within 24 to 48 hours. But the dissociative part means that your mind seems separate from the body, and it puts you into an observer mode. And for any of you who do this type of coaching or therapy, you know that if you can put yourself in the observer mode and become objective, you actually can help resolve issues. Ketamine also has this propensity to help you die metaphorically before you die, and thereby helping you to reduce death anxiety, not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, reduce that death anxiety. Very much a shorter journey duration. So it's something that can be used. We usually talk about a continuum of once a person is diagnosed with a life-threatening or terminal illness, all the way to being really close to end of life. And so ketamine can be used throughout that whole continuum. This, however, lethal in very high doses, and potentially addictive. So something to watch out for, arguably when you're working with people who are closer to the end of life, potentially addictive, although in the doses you're talking about is rare, very, very rare, if not impossible. But in any case, potentially addictive may not be such an issue. Going to spend just a little bit of time on this slide because another thing that's great about ketamine is that it comes in several different forms and it can be used for several different types of situation. So it can be administered in the home, and I would say primarily for mild to moderate mental distress. When we've looked at the studies having to do with telemedicine, you'll find that the significant reductions are when folks have mild to moderate mental distress, but not so much when it becomes severe. So it's also really great for pain maintenance. So what you find is that people will be administered perhaps ketamine in an intramuscular or in an IV form. And then for maintenance, whether it's for pain or for mental distress, they'll be prescribed troches or the sublingual lozenges or rapidly dissolving tablets for home use. The other thing that's really great about ketamine is that it can be used rectally. And yes, people actually, with the approval of their doctors, use the sublingual troches rectally. And this is really great for people toward the end of life who, first of all, digesting becomes really difficult. And in the case of a friend that you'll hear a case study, they're not always able to take the medicine orally. And if they're doing this in the home, then you can use it rectally. So now, of course, in a therapist's office, many times psychotherapists will use this in a way we call psychedelic therapy. And what that means is a lower dose of ketamine is given, and the person basically remains while they have an ability to talk, it softens the parts in terms of allowing a therapist to go deeper and to really share insights. So a lot of times it's used that way. In the case of end of life, it's clearly used in the hospital or in hospice situations. Now, this is basically under insurance for the most part. So severe chronic pain, you'll have inpatient protocols, or it's used at the very end of life to reduce terminal agitation. And then very, very often used in a medical office or clinic. And in this case, for chronic pain. So this is outpatient chronic pain. So the difference, inpatient might be 5 days inpatient of a continuous ketamine drip. Medical office outpatient, sometimes the protocol is as much as 10 days. 5 days weekend off, 5 days again with a significantly higher dose than you would get for mental distress. So anyway, it can be used so many different ways and so several different routes of administration, as you see there, and has shown to be extraordinarily beneficial. We're not going to go over these research studies. You can go back and look if you want, but you see nonetheless that they're showing statistically significant results. This is also a really great comprehensive review of the literature. And here's another one, an intranasal form. Most of the studies had been done on IV, but here's one on intranasal, although the one earlier on that I cited was an oral tablet used in hospice patients. So again, for anybody who's interested, either personally or has a client, then here's the studies that are either underway or are recruiting. So again, some interesting ones where you see PharmaTher, they're a private company using ketamine to reduce dyskinesia, which is levodopa-induced dyskinesia in Parkinson's patients. So some good work being done there. I wanted to show you this slide, and please, rough guide. This is so many factors go into this, whether a person is psychonaut, or whether a person is psychedelically naive. But the point is that you see here, MDMA would not recommend when a person is closer to the end of life, which, by the way, reminds me, this is why I don't talk about ayahuasca. I certainly don't talk about ibogaine in this context. Not to say that people with death anxiety, for a variety of reasons, might not turn to ayahuasca, because they do. But generally speaking, these medicines, four medicines, are gentler, and very, very, very dosage dependent, in terms of being gentle. So you see there, generally speaking, psilocybin, again, a lower dose, because you can always add more as you go during the journey, and really close to the end of life. And I hear some stories where people use this within days. People have facilitated journeys with their clients when they have been within days of passing. And again, very, very, very low doses, just to potentially have an effect that brings peace to the people. That's generally speaking what I hear from the facilitators. 5-MeO, you see there, a very, very low dose. You allow for the arc of the journey to complete, unlike you might do with psilocybin. And you may then choose to administer another very, very low dose. The thing about 5-MeO, known as the God molecule, it definitely puts you up there into unity consciousness and gives you a sense of what it might be on the other side. Certainly microdosing can be used. Lots of anecdotal stories about how it's been really helpful to reduce anxiety. And also anecdotal stories about how it's improved neuroplasticity. So it's really great to see those studies. And then there's things that, can be used, because the whole point, I didn't start off this way, the whole point of end of life is to help individuals have the death that they want, to reduce that death anxiety. And psychedelics psychedelics are clearly not the only method of getting there. So these Casina goggles, there's also brain tap, I think. So goggles that affect a calming, yeah, on the brain, and it allows people to better let go, either with or without psychedelics. Actually, there's a physician who uses brain tap to calm his patients before giving them ketamine. And one of the things that we know many physicians use, or nurse practitioners use, Versed to calm a person during a ketamine journey. And this physician has said he doesn't need his Versed anymore because he uses these goggles to calm his patients. So always an option. Just the health considerations. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go deeply into this, but of course they're going to be the same as they would be for any type of psychedelic. But in this case, of course, if we're talking with people who have compromised health conditions, then clearly uncontrolled hypertension, severe heart disease, severe asthma, or a recent stroke or heart attack are typically ruled out. Having said this, I've talked to really experienced facilitators, and they say they rarely turn a client down. As I said earlier, then it can be used during chemotherapy. The same Canadian gentleman said that if he could, he would love to do psilocybin 2 to 3 days before his next round of chemotherapy. Luckily, he had 7 psilocybin sessions during the time he was alive, from 2020 to 2024. And he found that doing psilocybin 2 to 3, he had 86 rounds of chemotherapy during that time period as well. But he found that the psilocybin reduced his need for the meds, the immunity reducing meds, which I'm forgetting what those names are, and then to to help him actually have a better frame of mind, to reduce the brain fog that, sometimes people call it chemo brain as a result of chemotherapy. So he just really liked it if it was a possibility. Studies have typically ruled out anybody with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, although ketamine is especially known to be helpful for people with bipolar depression. So not on the manic side, but on the depression side, and anybody with a borderline personality disorder. Ketamine, because of its action specifically on the liver and bladder, so anybody with a severe liver and bladder disorder, intracranial pressure, a propensity for interstitial cystitis, then they can be ruled out. And at very, very high doses, usually those at a recreational or the chronic pain type of doses, there is a possibility of cystitis that has to be looked at. Just some sort of a sample of drug interactions. So we know that SSRIs and SNRIs may blunt the subjective effects or antidepressant effects, but actually not for everybody. So you've got some really great anecdotal studies where they say, or not anecdotal stories where it doesn't blunt the subjective effects or the antidepressant effects. And we've got some studies that kind of are on both sides of the fence here. Lithium, though, is a total no-no for psilocybin, but interestingly enough, lithium can help enhance the effectiveness of ketamine, as do SSRIs. In fact, until recently, until Spravato got approval to be a monotherapy, and SSRI was mandated by the FDA to be prescribed along with the Spravato treatments. We know that benzodiazepines also can blunt the effect of psilocybin and are sometimes used to actually stop a trip. Down on ketamine side, oxytocin can sometimes be used and has been used in an IV to enhance effectiveness, as dextromethorphan, Robitussin, for example. People have, I don't know if we call it abused this, but known cases of where patients have on their own taken cough medicine after ketamine to theoretically prolong the effectiveness of it. Things like lamotrigine, benzos, gabapentin, naltrexone, and others can reduce effectiveness. In this case, just like SSRIs, not enough it's not an absolute contraindication. I'm an example of somebody who has remained on their lamotrigine and had great success with ketamine. However, I believe, and the doctor believes, that I just needed a higher dose. I mean, the reason why it's been effective is because I have a higher dose than is typically administered. MDMA, a lot more serious side effects here that you have to be aware of. Again, SSRIs can greatly reduce effectiveness. Wellbutrin, interestingly enough, can greatly increase the effects to the point where it can be fatal. Now, I don't know that this has ever happened, but theoretically it can be. And so one way is to reduce the amount of the MDMA to stay within a safe range, and not sure what that is. And you would need to ask somebody like Ben Malcolm, the spirit pharmacist, for his advice. Lithium here too, also associated with a greater risk for seizures. So a quick summary: psilocybin, a little bit longer journey, the most mystical of these three anyway, brings those issues front and center. You see ketamine, a shorter journey, puts you into observer mode and can effectively treat chronic pain and mental distress. MDMA, about the same length of journey as psilocybin, can really help deepen or repair those relationships and provide self-compassion. So many of you know about where it's available legally, and I just want to touch on a few things. So Psilocybin, we'll talk about Oregon and Colorado. Some people use psilocybin under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This remains a gray area. However, there are many psilocybin churches in operation around the country. And then, decriminalized, which for those of you who don't know it, merely means it's becomes a really low priority for the law enforcement. Still can come with penalties, although many times those penalties are reduced. For example, it might just be a fine. It might just be you have to take a class if you're caught with it, and it's always tied to dosage. Ketamine, we've already talked about. MDMA, really unfortunate. That expanded access, I think, what do I have here now in? Yes. So expanded access has basically been shut down. I just wanted to point out a couple of lawsuits in the state of Oregon. Then psilocybin has to be administered in a licensed service center. So you see Catherine Tucker there as an attorney. She is one of the attorneys who brought suit along with a number of facilitators against the Oregon Health Authority, claiming that they must allow reasonable accommodation to anyone who's not able to get to a licensed service center for whatever reason under the American Disabilities Act. The state has fired back and they're asking for that suit to be dismissed. Under right to try, so 40 states here and at the federal level, and you heard for those of you who were on earlier, Canada is also looking to employ right to try, and this is typically granted to people depending on state. Sometimes you have to have a prognosis of a year or less to live. Some states 6 months less to live, but your physician has an ability to prescribe an experimental drug, so an investigational drug that has passed at least phase 1 of a clinical trial and is still under investigation. However, turns out that when Dr. Sunil Agarwal with the Ames Institute tried to do this, he was denied access by the DEA. So the same attorney, Catherine Tucker, with a host of other attorneys, now have 2 active petitions against the DEA, but this lawsuit's been going on since 2021. So they're looking at, or they're asking the DEA to reschedule, or they're asking the DEA to allow Schedule I drugs like psilocybin or MDMA to be included in right to try. This one I actually have the most hope for, and I had the opportunity to be in Washington, D.C. and speak on this behalf. So this was legislation, as you can see. This has bipartisan and actually bicameral support as well at the federal level. So it's expected to be reintroduced now. It has a lot of support for veterans. So again, that's actually the primary driver here, to allow any Schedule I drug to be transferred to Schedule II, which allows a physician to prescribe it for those with life-threatening conditions, as well as PTSD and other conditions. So fingers crossed, at least there's momentum in terms of some folks in the Congress and folks in the Senate to bring this forward. And I think a greater, not just political will, but a greater will for constituency groups to come together on this one piece of legislation. In Colorado, what I love about Colorado and Oregon for that matter is it's not a medical model, because arguably for anyone close to the end of life, they're not looking at psychedelics for a psychotherapeutic use. They are looking at psychedelics potentially for a mystical experience and to reduce their fear of dying, which is not always associated with, like I say, a psychotherapeutic use. Can be, but not always. So what's cool about Colorado is they learned from the Oregon model. So I say there they have supported adult use plus, because what they allow for is dual licensure. So if an approved facilitator was also a physician or a nurse practitioner or a therapist or another licensed profession, they can use their licensed profession for the client. So somebody who needs a psychotherapist, then they can have that therapy during the session. That is not true in Oregon currently. Now, what's a little wacky is everybody was excited because Colorado, the rules, the Proposition 122, as it was passed, was to provide psilocybin in the home. However, DORA is the rules making committee. They threw a monkey wrench into everything, like really late, like in last December. And so they said that first, they said that it had to be somebody receiving palliative care, which rules out a whole lot of people. So they have agreed. The final rules, I've not seen the final rules yet, but now they've expanded it to include anybody who's homebound or disabled. Somewhat still problematic because those terms have not been well defined. The other major issue, well, there's two actually, but one of them is they had proposed a rule that a facilitator had to have an additional certificate in palliative care. Not needed. I mean, I don't know why that would be needed. And I come at this from having owned a home health care agency, and it clearly isn't necessary if somebody isn't requiring palliative care. So anyway, hopefully they'll sort that out before the final rules come out. So in the state of Oregon, again, supported adult use, there currently now is legislation to amend the current law to allow for this dual licensure. The proposed in-home services, there is that lawsuit I mentioned, and then I'm working on a team to begin to research, draft, and file legislation. I just want to give a plug. This will be in the slides. There's friends here that I really trust, Omnia Group here in Ashland, that provide both consumer and practitioner retreats and experientials, similarly in Boulder. So let me see, I can't believe the time. I may just keep going here and hopefully get through this a little faster than I thought. So this section we can go through fairly quickly. So what's always interesting to me is, we as humans have had an eternal quest to understand this cycle of birth and death. What is beyond? So we know this from ancient times. And Brian Murescu, again, the gentleman who wrote the Immortality Key, we know that the mystical experience has been ranked by many, was like fully 2/3 of the people as one of the top 5 experiences. So right up there with getting married, having children. And it was also correlated to the therapeutic benefit. So again, and I would argue that many people who are seeking psychedelics toward the end of life are looking for that mystical experience. Doesn't matter if they're an atheist or somebody who's deeply religious. A lot of folks are looking for that mystical experience. And Dr. Bayak, well-known palliative care physician and researcher, I think said it best and set psychedelics apart from regular drugs. It's this memory of the experience that becomes the anxiolytic. So basically, when you can embody this feeling of being safe, of being resourced, then that stays with you. So it's an experiential therapy, clearly. I won't go over this. This is just really interesting how they've linked psychedelic experiences with end of life, with near-death experiences, and very similar. And I'll speak for myself, but I think I'd rather have a psychedelic journey than go through a near-death experience. Let's see, this one is pretty cool just because ketamine was most like a near-death experience. And again, kind of why we say metaphorically, people set intentions to die. And I know a person who actually sets her intention to go over on the other side, and she chats with her loved ones who have passed. I'm going to skip over this. You can see Roland Griffiths. Many of us wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. I'm gonna skip over this too. Carrie Pappas speaks in terms of, again, reducing anxiety and having that embodied basically for years afterwards. She was in the Johns Hopkins study. Thomas Hartle, he's the Canadian gentleman. The link should be in here. I highly recommend you to listen to an edited conversation I had with him. He is so eloquent. 7 psilocybin journeys after being diagnosed in 2016 with stage 4 colon cancer. Just came to an understanding of his cancer, being consciousness, and being able to deal with it. I'll just share this one story here because I think this is so illustrative of the power of ketamine. Patty was diagnosed with head and neck cancer 2016. She suffered from such debilitating depression over the fear of dying that she didn't leave her house. This was before I even knew anything about ketamine. She was administered the standard loading doses, and her mood lifted. And after the 6th loading dose, she felt joy. She got out and found a job. She continued to use these boosts because, again, ketamine short lasting. But a year or so later, I mean, the disease continued to progress and take a toll. She suffered from neuropathy and trigeminal neuralgia. She returned for higher dose ketamine. She's able to manage her pain. As I said, this is the person who uses the lozenges rectally because basically they destroyed her jaw. And she's been able to manage her pain and maintain her job. So you'll see these other stories that are really just as compelling. And one of them, by the way, is done in conjunction with medical aid in dying, not as the person is dying, but to help the person come to terms with their dying. You know, again, as I kind of said, our goal is not to serve psychedelics. Our goal is really to help reframe death and sacred journey, and to know that we all have a wise and interior death mechanism. And so when we look at, for anybody who chooses to work in this field, I really encourage you to think about the totality of this individual so that you become a trusted advocate. You know, a lot of times when all of us who've gone through psychedelic training, we've taught about preparation, the journey, and integration, like 3 distinct phases, coming with terms that are like three prep sessions, a journey, 3 integration sessions. Well, I would encourage you to go. It's not like that when you're working with people toward the end of life. You become a trusted advocate. You're that person that allows your client to let go and fully experience the medicine. You become that family counselor. We'll come back to that. You may be a holistic practitioner. You may be the psychedelic facilitator. You may facilitate for families. You may sit vigil, and you may support medical aid in dying at the end. Hence the need too for working with, or if you're one of the individuals, to know you need a collaborative team. A lot of times when I work with end-of-life doulas, they'll have an experienced facilitator work alongside with them. And conversely, an experienced facilitator might want somebody like an end-of-life doula or a chaplain. Whatever it is that your client needs should be a part of this. And one of the key things here is a medical clearance, whether that individual's primary care team is supportive or not. There are physicians who will do psychedelic medical consultations. Please email me if you need any recommendations. So, but when we think about why do people use psychedelics toward the end of life and what they can do, they really support letting go. And if you think about it, you as an individual going through this have to learn how to let go of everything. And I don't just mean your loved ones, everything you knew about life, everything you cared about for life. We know fundamentally they can reduce psychological or existential distress. They can help you gain a knowing, a real sort of embodied sense of the next place, and help you lose your fear of it. We say quite often psychedelics are death work. I mean, theoretically, of course, we would be doing psychedelics way before we're faced with a terminal illness so that we come to terms with our fear of dying, which, by the way, is more of a Western thing than other religious traditions or spiritual traditions. But then also, all death work is psychedelic, and so hence I'll say later, psychedelics are sometimes not at all what you want to use. In fact, that's this next slide, I thought. Yes. So at some point, a lot of times as a facilitator, you go, no, you know what? Let's move into some other areas, call it death medicine, call it integrative therapies, that will help, again, the person have the kind of death that they want to have. And psychedelics are no longer useful. I think for anybody who works with individuals toward the end of life, there has to be a sensitivity, and I hope this resonates with anybody who's interested in using psychedelics. And in terms of why you might look at the use of psychedelics, but take it in its totality. And I have a couple more slides here. You know, we're dealing with a lot, and it's really important to kind of understand. And just to pull out a few of these things, that last point, again, saying goodbye to everything you hold near and dear. But even fundamentally, if you're dealing with somebody who just has basic symptom and pain management, I mean, that can take up all your energy as it is. The gentleman whose video I skipped over said one of the great things about psilocybin is that it helped him shift his negative energy that was going towards his disease into a positive energy. And he thinks that's why it helped him stay alive much longer. Like, see, he was given 18 months to live in 2016. He died in 2024. Really need to be understanding of what I'll call the socio and cultural concerns, understanding what are those beliefs, understanding what are those family dynamics. Are they going to have a supportive family? Are they going to have a divisive family? Are they going to have a family that tries to dictate all the rules? Really important to understand. Are they receptive to outsiders' help? I mean, this is so cultural where, you know, some people say, I have to do this by myself. I don't want anybody helping me. Who makes the decision? Is it an adult child? Is it the spouse? Then we also have to be aware of caregiver fatigue. So you've got a spouse stepping in, just had a situation like this, had a spouse stepping in, had to do everything, wanted to do everything for her husband. Well, as you can imagine, she burned herself out. And so being aware of that is really, really important. And this brings me to family participation. So always important to include your family if possible. Also to be cognizant of some folks not having a family, which is why one of those points will be building that support network, understanding who may be there when you as a facilitator may not be there, or if you're the individual participate in the journey, to know you've got people you can count on, and to build that support before any kind of a journey. But anyway, so family participation can take any number of forms. You know, at least you're part of that support or care team. Potentially you could be there to witness the journey, but not participate. You can participate in their own journey. I certainly know people who the family dynamics were such that they were like this. So they decided to each take their own journey and then they integrated together. Some people decide to participate together. Some people decide to participate in grief therapy even before the loved one dies and clearly after the loved one dies, and or to be there during the integration to really understand how their loved one may have shifted their beliefs and their desires. And then, of course, there's a whole set of spiritual concerns, really understanding an individual's religious beliefs. And for anybody going through this, what does my religion dictate to me? Do I think I'm going to hell? Can I let go of that fact? Can I let go of that either through the use of psychedelics or through some other means? Really, really important to understand. I won't go over this. This is interesting though, because we really need to support anybody with an end of life experience. In this case, they're talking about deathbed visions, contact with deceased loved ones. What we know is that anybody who does experience these things, it goes a long way to helping them. So I want to point you, because we don't have time for me to go over this, but I've got 2 guides on the website, helping to decide if psychedelic medicines are right for you, and 7 factors to consider how to select a facilitator, and then 7 questions to ask them. So you can look at that. And so I think I'll hop over these because these are in the guides. I think here the most important thing, because I hear this over and over again, and I don't mean just with people who are toward the end of life, they allow a facilitator that they don't feel comfortable with. And it totally ruins your experience. So if you don't feel comfortable with the facilitator, don't feel obligated. Ask them if they can recommend somebody else. It happens all the time. There is the process, very similar, obviously, to anybody who's undergoing a psychedelic journey, but I just want to point out this: informed consent takes on a whole set of new parameters if you're talking about working with somebody toward the end of life. You really want to make it an empowered choice for that individual. Again, if you're the individual, you've got to think about it this way. You have to be aware of your and your client's cognitive ability. I haven't met any facilitator yet who will do a psychedelic journey when the person is not able to fully consent. Set those expectations, because sometimes psychedelics are not going to do anything, and then you can review alternatives, clearly gain agreement ahead of time on what responses will be to different situations. And really a biggie, review potential for a client passing during a journey or shortly thereafter, gaining their understanding and their consent that it can happen depending on how close you work with that person toward the end of life. And then also really, really important, gaining consent from the family or a healthcare surrogate. And clearly there are facilitators who have gone forward when the family is fighting them on taking a psychedelic. And you've got to decide for yourself if this is something that you can accommodate. I mean, most people don't. If a family member resists their loved one undergoing a psychedelic journey, better sometimes to back off. I am going to hop out here, because a lot of this stuff then you can read, and I'm really sorry. Sometimes I do a better job at watching my time here. So preparation, so these preparation and integration questions that you'll all get a copy of. Again, there's a lot of different questions that can be asked. These are more geared to people toward the end of life, and certainly just one statement here is that you don't necessarily sit down with a person, or you don't yourself sit down and go, yeah, I'm going to answer all these questions. These are things that you need to uncover and understand over time. So anyway, that's me. Reach out for any questions. Check out the programs we have. We have a lot of programs, like I say, connect, educate, advocate. So I will hop out there and ask you. Yeah, I know what. Okay, Nancy, thank you for that message. I am going to put those links in the email you are all going to get. Okay, yeah, thank you, Nancy, for reminding me. I'm gonna send you the video clips and the 44-minute video of Thomas, because I promise you, I bet you anybody here who's listened to it would agree with me. I promise you, you'll absolutely love it. Oh, Teresa's saying yes. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. All right, there's got to be some questions, because I get, oh my God, and thank you for hanging in there with me. I really appreciate it. Oh, Teresa, you have a question?
Yes, I have a couple. I love this class. And, you know, I think I did one of your classes a couple years ago, similar, and there's so much more information now. Thank you so much. I noticed, so I was writing down recently diagnosed to end of life and the doses. And I noticed there was nothing about LSD, and you really didn't talk a little bit about anything about LSD, especially in the microdosing category. Is there a reason, or?
Well, one easy answer is to say my ability to learn all this stuff is, like, tested. But truly, I believe that if you have a choice between LSD, I'm not talking about microdosing, LSD and psilocybin with being a shorter journey, and they're both classical psychedelics. They both have that propensity for a mystical experience. I think it's better, especially you're dealing with people with medications. I already talked about, opioids. A lot of times, you're going to give that person their opioid during a session. So, it's why push it? But people do. And of course, a lot of things are dose dependent. You can do a lower dose. But that's generally speaking, because it's a longer journey, a little bit harder on a body that may be becoming more frail. The microdosing study, I'm really excited to see what that is going to happen. I mean, my belief, psilocybin microdosing, ketamine microdosing, LSD microdosing, all possibilities. They come with very, very little risk. I mean, the thing about these medicines in total is they are so safe. The research has shown they have high safety profiles. I mean, there's always a risk, but high safety profiles. Did that answer your question?
It did. I have two more and then I got to hop off, and I'm sorry. You mentioned antidepressants as some of the things to look out for before journey. And I know with what I've done that it's kind of a no-go with certain antidepressants. So I'm curious, because it says that it blunts it, and I'm curious about, people talk a lot about serotonin syndrome. I have somebody in particular on a low dose of Lexapro who's taking it like every other day. If she tries to go 2 days, it's a little too much, and she's looking to do a journey. And so I like the idea that it just blunts it versus a serotonin syndrome. I haven't really seen serotonin syndrome with people. They usually are weaned off. Would it be okay a couple of days before to not take the antidepressant before the journey, or what is the recommendation?
Okay, I do not give medical advice. However, what I will say, I always have an opinion though. But yeah, that Melissa, thank you. MDMA is much more problematic. All right. My go-to guy is Ben Malcolm, the spirit pharmacist, spiritpharmacist.com. And he will tell you that there is no solid evidence for serotonin syndrome.
Okay.
And clearly he comes down on this fence of do no harm. So if it's going to create more problems to take a person off their SSRI, and create the withdrawal symptoms that can come with it, brain zaps and everything, then don't go off the SSRI, leave them on it and increase the psilocybin dose. Now, would I tell you to do that without some support? No. If your client is worried about it, you can go ahead and talk with Ben Malcolm, or another physician or medical person who can do psychedelic medical consults. But yeah, generally speaking, it blunts the effects, not necessarily the therapeutic effects. So anyway.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, I appreciate your input. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day and thank you again.
Good to see you. All right, Michael.
Hi there. Great presentation, Chris. Very
Thank you.
pleasure to be here. Yeah, so much wonderful information. So there are just a few things I'll try and whip through really quick. I couldn't help but think about this and kind of putting it up as has there, to your knowledge, has there been any comparative studies using adjuncting Versed for ketamine and used instead for that anxiety that sometimes in and around type of situations? Because it just kind of came out that could actually be used as an alternative.
Say that again. Ketamine,
Used instead of midazolam.
Oh, used instead of?
Yeah.
There is. Because I know but I can't tell you. I didn't really read it all.
I can actually do a little search on it, but just during your discussion, it was like,
yeah,
these should be almost like put head to head.
Yeah, definitely. There, I know what's out there. So yeah, go ahead and Google it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And just two quick things about 5-MeO-DMT, my favorite molecule. There's some contention about the legal status of 5 in Canada. Can you speak to that? I've done my own research, just like looking around, trying to, because some people are very anxious to say, oh, it's legal, it's legal. And then other people that I think are a little bit more informed saying that it's in some kind of gray zone where it's almost slipped through the cracks. And then, I asked an AI bot and it said that it's completely illegal. I just wanted to know, Chris, if you had any understanding. And
wow.
Yeah.
I can't say with 100% definitiveness that it's illegal, but I'm going to say it's illegal. I mean, it's, yeah, unless it's, yeah. If you find out, you let me know, but I would be
You bet I will.
shocked.
Yeah, because I do think it's in some kind of a legal, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but like it was almost like a little bit of an oversight. So it's almost like unclassified. And some people I know that are here and working with it, I seem quite sure of that, but I just haven't been able to put myself, like on a trusted source of information or like, okay, where did you get that from? And nobody, nobody seems to know. Last one.
What's probably funny is they go, yeah, but I heard that. Yeah, but I heard that. And it's probably all came from one source. And then it just kind of like, yeah, sure. And that person was lying. So anyway, yeah, Olga.
Because I've even looked at someone, Olga is mentioning for Health Canada, and looked on their website and, it's not there or not there.
Yeah.
Which is, the very interesting thing. I do know that anecdotally that, mushrooms are very available in Canada now in that kind of quasi-legal area. And even through some websites, without mentioning, they're easy to find. But I know that one of the websites where a lot of my associates will commonly get magic mushrooms online also have those 5-MeO vape pens and doses of LSD that can be bought with a simple bank transfer here in Canada. So it's very, but of course marijuana was like that before, in the moments before legalization here, where you can easily buy.
It's one of the reasons why I love Canada. Of course, now I really love Canada. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Just if I could
I'm
just,
sorry, got it something else?
yes, and it's more to the point. Thank you very much. Can you just tell us about any of the anecdotal reports so far, or any studies been done with 5 and palliative care as yet,
No.
or are they
I
currently
can tell
being
you
done? Okay.
unequivocally there's hardly any research being done with 5-MeO, but I don't know, when I said up front that I'll be doing a workshop, not me personally, I am so tickled. I have like the foremost authority, I don't know, call himself authority, but Joel Briere, he is the co-founder of 5. So, you know, again, the best educational and training organization out there on 5-MeO, and he has Tandava retreats down in Mexico that does the 5-MeO. So I am so tickled that he's going to be teaching a class on it March 27th.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Oh yeah, thank you, Melissa. All right, Scott, nice to see you. Yeah, you got to come
Scott,
off
you're
mute.
muted.
Sorry about
There
that.
you go.
Still learning. Seems like it's different every time. Yeah, I'm a psychiatrist down here in the U.S. and you're in Canada. You said midazolam. Versed is the big pharma name for that short-acting and fairly potent benzodiazepine. Generally, I think people don't give benzodiazepines, you know, in someone in crisis unless, you know, you try and do it in a controlled setting. The other thought about the SSRIs, the Lexapro, I'm sorry I didn't get on while that person was still there, is that some of the SSRIs are very short acting. Lexapro and another one called Paxil are like that. And so when people miss a dose, they tend to have a fairly rapid discontinuation syndrome. I hate to call it withdrawal because that tends to associate more with opioids and sedatives. So the question, for example, would be to stay on whatever dose you're at and go ahead with it. People on long acting, like the longest acting being fluoxetine or Prozac, whether you take it or not, or you could skip it just before your journey, that's long acting and it's not going to have any fluctuation in the dose that's sudden, which can be quite disturbing if you have a discontinuation. And yes, it may blunt the effects of the journey, but I don't think it'll do any damage, just in a supervised setting. So I just wanted to put those thoughts in. And if you're unsure about all that, then just don't refer the person on to someone who is comfortable with the combination of psychopharmacology plus these very potent entheogens.
Thank you, Scott. That was excellent. All right. There's so many messages in the text. I am not going to look at it. So if you put a question in the text, you're going to have to raise your hand. Anybody got a question? We are up for time actually, but I'm happy to try and answer any other question.
Chris, it's Kay.
Hi.
Just hearing about, I knew in Colorado about the homebound use being questioned by Dora. I didn't hear that they were asking, that there are now discussions of palliative care certification, end of life certification. Where might I find the most updated things about that? And what might that look like?
Yeah, there were two things actually. One was that I spoke to specifically, and then one was that they wanted the facilitators to be associated with in the case of Colorado, a healing center and have 100 hours under their belt. So so many people complained about that. And so what I can send you, and remind me if I forget, but I'm gonna make a note. I have what this proposal. I was on the final rules hearing, open Zoom, whatever. And that was January 14th or something like that. And so I was searching for, do they have the final rules? I don't think they do yet. Final. But I can send you what I was sent by Healing Advocacy Fund that had like the language that they were proposing, because they got a raft of shit, like I was saying. Because they came out with this only eligible for palliative care. And they came out with it late, right? So anyway, I'll send you what I have, and we'll just have to track it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Olga, did you have a question?
No, I was going to add a voice to that
Oh.
conversation around palliative care. I think it's, and I can't speak to the specifics, but being somebody who kind of bridges, mental health, palliative care, end of life doula work, I think it's worthwhile, because I wonder if the facilitators who are part of the depression, coming from a more psychosocial, maybe social work, whether actually they have enough. And I don't know, right? That's kind of my interest, is taking a look at, is there some form of their own death anxiety and being confronted to hold a space for death awareness, death rehearsal. And I think, I'm not sure, again, whether that's coming from the concern and ensuring people have some of that. It's a good question to me, because I worry about that sometimes too, whether or not the psychotherapists and the coaches and those who have the psychedelic training, they're even aware of what could arise for them as a confrontation with end of life, or the fact that the person can die. Like, that's even, like, working in palliative care, nobody wants to take that responsibility, especially when there's no longer a consensual, mentally aware person. Anyhow, thank you for offering all of this. This is so great.
Yeah, that's a good point, Olga. I mean, a couple of things come up. One is, it's why I absolutely love, and why one of the reasons why I started the nonprofit was to bring end-of-life doulas, chaplains, hospice social workers, hospice physicians, nurses into the conversation, onto the care team, to be educated, because I think that they make really great facilitators for the exact reason that you just brought up. My concern is when, you try to mandate something. A palliative care certificate isn't going to help an individual who really is looking for a mystical experience necessarily. But your point is well taken. It's almost like self-care, which is a whole other course, right? How do you as a facilitator manage your self-care? How do you ground yourself? So, but the problem too is that sometimes you have to have 2 or 3 years work in a palliative care center in order to get certified. So, it just would severely reduce death phobia exists in palliative care. That reminds me, my buddy in Eugene, there was somebody from Eugene here, but my buddy in Eugene as a doula, he was trying to talk about death and dying in an assisted living facility, and they literally told him, we don't talk about death here. That's kind of
The
how it is.
stigma is real. The stigma is real. And that's what we're, I think, attempting to bridge or conquer. I find these sessions really interesting as they weave in the spaces of, social, legal, and this gray zone, and this, underground community, above community, harm reduction. It's just an interesting dance within the social and the self and the big S and the little s and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Olga. All right. Anything else? Oh, yeah. Okay, Karen, good point. Which is why I skipped over that one slide, but I'm a big proponent of facilitators having their own, let's say, experiences. And so I mentioned, so here in Ashland, there's the AMIA group that we're doing there. It's not we. They're doing a 2 psilocybin journey 5-day experiential retreat, March 24th, March 28th. For that reason, and it's specifically for practitioners who work in this field. So you'll find that on my website as well, or I can send you the information. And then my buddy Heather in Boulder, Colorado does the same sort of thing. She's really experienced in working with primarily women, but people with cancer. And she's running an experiential retreat or one-on-one sessions for practitioners who work in the end of life space. Really, I think, important. Going to Jamaica. Oh, you did? Okay. I'm not familiar with that one. All right. Anything else? Then I'm going to say again, thanks for hanging. This has really been fun once again. And yeah, hope to see you guys in another program. Anyway, but yeah, check out my website. There's a lot of stuff. We have the only practitioners directory that includes people with psychedelic and end of life care experience. So, and if you have somebody who you think a client or you're somebody yourself who may benefit from an online discussion group, if you know this individual has a life-threatening or terminal illness, you'll see on my website, we call it the Journey Circle, and they're invited to participate, have this amazing end-of-life doula who is facilitating the online discussions for anybody in the US or Canada or wherever, actually. So anyway, have a great rest of your day wherever you are.